Rings of Power Season 2 has come to an end, and inevitably it has gotten mixed reactions from fans and critics. So in this video, I'd like to do something a little different. Rather than reiterating the criticism you've likely already heard, I'd like to shine a light on one thing that I really liked about Season 2, because I do feel that buried beneath some of the more shallow and boring parts of this series, there is a glimmer of potential, which, if refined and crafted by a skilled hand, could give us hope for a better Season 3. Heads up, this video does contain big spoilers for Season 2. So let's get into it on the art of storytelling. So it's actually pretty straightforward. The thing that worked for me in Season 2 is specifically the relationship between the characters Annatar and Celebrimbor. And I would wager that for those of you who watched the show, even if you didn't like the show, you were probably more engaged in scenes involving these two characters. So what is it exactly that made this storyline more engrossing? Why is it that when we cut away from Celebrimbor's story to a scene with Galadriel, I felt that we were cutting to the B plot? Why is it that the story of Celebrimbor being tempted and manipulated by Annatar felt like the real story? Well, let me put the question to you another way. Which character do you feel is the protagonist of Season 2? Which character's actions drive the plot forward? Which character confronts the greatest moral challenge? Which character's choices have the biggest repercussions? Galadriel has generally been positioned as the show's protagonist, and maybe when we get to Season 5, if we get to Season 5, the reasons for that will become more apparent. But as for Season 2, the answer is pretty clear. It's Celebrimbor. And if you think about it, this makes sense. And in many ways, this is as it should be. Let's remember, this show is called The Rings of Power and is ostensibly an effort to portray the forging of the rings and its consequences more or less as described in Tolkien's mythology. So let's first make sure that we have a basic understanding of Celebrimbor's story as told by Tolkien. Celebrimbor is an elven smith and the grandson of the greatest of all elven smiths, Feanor. Now, he had a deep desire to create powerful and enduring works of beauty, but he was also consumed by an obsession to possess his own creations. It's a kind of Promethean allegory, a mythic tale warning of the double-edged nature of hubris and ambition. And it means Celebrimbor's gift of craftsmanship comes also with a curse, a forewarning about the dangers of trying to defy the natural order. Celebrimbor forges the Rings of Power for a noble reason, to preserve the beauty and vitality of elvendom in Middle-earth. But in the end, he reaches beyond the limits of his own power and unwittingly helps Sauron to gain power. Ultimately, Celebrimbor redeems himself by refusing to reveal the whereabouts of the three elven rings. The moral of the story is crystal clear. Ambition is dangerous if it's not tempered by humility. And in my view, the Rings of Power does capture the spirit of that story. Now, I did not like Halbrand's character in the first season. I had a really hard time making the connection between this ordinary dude and the Dark Lord, and I found his reveal to Galadriel to be clumsy, far-fetched, and confusing. Annatar, on the other hand, is a character whose actions and motivations make sense to me. The way his eyes always seem to be looking through people and into the unseen world is a brilliant touch. On the one hand, he's a mastermind, orchestrating the downfall of Middle-earth. But on the other hand, he's a witness to it, letting the people of Middle-earth succumb to their own temptations and corruption. Annatar identifies Celebrimbor's conceits, his pride and ambition to create artifacts of more than mere jewelcraft. By promising to help him to exceed the achievements of even the great Feanor, he exposes Celebrimbor's character flaw, his obsessive need to prove himself to best Feanor. The most critical moment in Celebrimbor's character arc happens in episode 3, when he chooses to lie to King Gil-galad about the making of the 7 dwarven rings, a decision he makes of his own volition, and which Annatar immediately recognizes as an opportunity. When the 7 rings are forged and turn out to have a corrupting influence on King Durin, Annatar suggests that it's because the rings were forged under the shadow of Celebrimbor's deception, saying,
"These are matters of spirit as much as craft."
That's one of the better lines of dialogue in the series. Annatar then suggests to Celebrimbor that he should confess his deceit to Gil-galad, an offer that Celebrimbor refuses because he would then be forbidden from forging anything ever again. This leads ultimately to his decision to try to undo the damage by forging the 9. This is a classic downward spiral, the moral descent of a tragic figure whose original sin sets off a chain of increasingly self-destructive actions, plunging him deeper into darkness. What's interesting is that Annatar doesn't directly deceive Celebrimbor until Celebrimbor himself chooses to deceive others. Annatar is responsible for causing Celebrimbor's hallucinations, but these are also of Celebrimbor's own making. They're the delusions one would expect of a man whose ambition has taken over, right? So he becomes increasingly convinced of his own genius and that he and he alone has the skill and knowledge to forge the rings. He blames others for his own failures, becoming increasingly isolated, ultimately becoming trapped inside his own delusions. A proverbial white tower that in this case is also literal. In the end, the forge itself becomes his prison, with time repeating itself. After all, Celebrimbor only wanted time and solitude to complete his work. Annatar merely gave him what he wanted. It's a nice Twilight Zone-ish poetic irony. Now, the reason all of this works so well is that the character of Annatar is really just the personification of Celebrimbor's own pride and conceit. In the end, Celebrimbor breaks free from his delusion, recognizes Annatar's true nature, and defies him. So his character is ultimately redeemed, as he is in Tolkien's writing. And Celebrimbor's final scene in the show is genuinely powerful. Like, I really felt some strong emotions when he finally resisted Annatar. That moment was absolutely earned through the skillful development of these two characters. And when Annatar shed a tear at Celebrimbor's death, wow, that was the cherry on top, because it made you wonder if he felt genuine remorse. And that just makes the whole story that much more complex and interesting. Whether you interpret Celebrimbor's story as one of him being deceived by an external influence or being deluded by his own hubris makes for an interesting discussion about the nature of ambition, temptation, and corruption. And that's why this story is good. It's because the characters on screen are being used to pose a moral question, and finally to answer that question. This can only be done if the characters have agency, if their motivations are plausible, and if the events of the plot are driven forward by their actions. This is what ultimately leads to a coherent statement about what is good and what is bad. The more removed the other characters are from this central drama, the less engaging their story inevitably is. And the approach of having multiple simultaneous interconnected storylines might simply be a necessary evil of making a sprawling 5-season television show. I don't know, maybe these other characters are being saved for future stories in future seasons, and that's why they're less engaging right now. But it does make me wonder if a better approach to this series might have been to focus more deliberately on fewer characters in each season, rather than having to give Arondir a fetch quest or having Gandalf's origin story simmering on the back burner. In any case, I believe in giving credit where it's due, so I'd like to applaud the writers for giving us what I feel is an excellent portrayal of the tragedy of Celebrimbor. If you disagree and you still just don't like this show, I totally respect that, but I hope you at least enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you on the next one.